I'm Brian, 34, a self-made architect who built my life from scratch while watching my parents shower my older brother with everything. Growing up, I was always second best, the afterthought, the backup plan. When my career finally took off and I decided to buy my first house, I never expected my family would try to claim it as their entitlement. But sometimes the quietest rebellion speaks the loudest. If you're watching from a place where your family also tries to claim your success as their entitlement, make sure to like and subscribe. Let's talk about how I finally set boundaries that changed my life forever. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood in Portland, where the houses were nice enough but nothing special. My parents Linda and Robert worked stable jobs that provided well for our family of 4. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my older brother Derek was the golden child. 2 years my senior Derek had an easy charm that seemed to captivate my parents in ways my more reserved personality never could. School was where I first noticed the disparity in how we were treated. When Derek brought home C grades, my parents would celebrate with ice cream and praise for his hard work. When I brought home straight, as it was met with a distracted good job and immediate questions about how Derek was doing in his classes, this pattern repeated through elementary and middle school, with Derek's mediocrity celebrated while my achievements were treated as expected and unremarkable. My interest in architecture began when I was 12. I found an old drafting table someone had left on the curb and dragged it home, setting it up in the corner of my bedroom. While my parents spent weekends driving Derek to soccer games and cheering from the sidelines, I taught myself to draw floor plans and elevations. I saved my allowance for months to buy architecture books from used bookstores, studying the works of Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan when other kids were playing video games. You know, Brian, not everyone can be a star athlete like your brother, my mother once said, finding me at my drafting table instead of outside. But it's nice you have a little hobby. That little hobby became my passion, my escape, and eventually my career. But my family never saw it that way. In high school, the contrast became even starker. Derek was popular but academically average, getting by with minimal effort. When college application time came, my parents hired tutors to help Derek improve his SAT scores and paid for essay coaches to polish his applications. Meanwhile, I maintained a 4.0 GPA, became editor of the school newspaper, and won a statewide architecture competition for high school students, all without any parental support or acknowledgement. The college years highlighted the disparity even more painfully. Derek got into a decent state school, and my parents covered his tuition housing meal plan and even gave him a monthly allowance. They bought him a used car so he could drive home on weekends. When I got accepted to Cornell's prestigious architecture program with a partial scholarship, my parents congratulated me, but immediately explained they had already committed their college savings to Derek. "You're so smart, Brian. You'll figure it out," my father said, as if my academic achievements were somehow a reason to withhold support rather than offer it. And I did figure it out. I took out student loans. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus library and another 15 at a local blueprint shop. During summers, I worked 60-hour weeks at construction sites to understand building from the ground up. I lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates eating ramen and working until 2 in the morning to keep up with my coursework. Derek, meanwhile, spent 5 years getting a 4-year business degree, changing majors twice, and taking light course loads, because, as my mother explained, college is about the experience, not just rushing through. When he finally graduated with a middling GPA, my parents threw a lavish party and gifted him a 2-week trip to Europe as a graduation present. When I graduated with honors a year earlier, I got a card with $50 inside because they were a little tight right now from paying for Derek's final semester. My early career reflected the same pattern. I started in a small architecture firm, living in a studio apartment, so small I could reach my refrigerator from my bed. I worked 70-hour weeks, volunteered for every difficult project, and slowly built my reputation. When I was featured in a regional architecture magazine for an innovative small commercial project, I excitedly called my parents. My mother listened for 30 seconds before interrupting to tell me Derek had just been made assistant manager at his retail job. During those early years, I met Marcus at a professional networking event. Unlike my family, he recognized my talent and dedication immediately. He became not just a friend, but an ally who validated what I was beginning to suspect: my family's treatment wasn't normal or fair. Dude, do they even hear themselves? Marcus asked after witnessing a particularly painful family dinner where my parents fawned over Derek's new watch purchase, while completely ignoring my announcement about a major project I'd landed. It's like you're invisible to them. It was around this time I met Rachel at a coffee shop near my office. Warm, perceptive, and kind, she was working on her master's in psychology while teaching part-time. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, both of us, careful and intentional. When she finally met my family 6 months in, she was stunned by their behavior. I thought maybe you were exaggerating, or it was just your perception, she whispered to me in the kitchen as we cleaned up after dinner while my parents showered Derek and his new girlfriend Allison with attention in the living room. But it's actually worse than you described. Despite my growing resentment, I kept trying to maintain a relationship with my family. I called regularly, visited on holidays, brought thoughtful gifts. Each time I hoped for recognition or reciprocity that never came. Each disappointment added another layer to the invisible wall, growing between us brick by brick, slight by slight, year after year. At 28, after 6 years of proving myself at smaller firms, I landed my dream job at Henderson & Pike, one of Seattle's most prestigious architecture firms. The position meant relocating from Portland, which my parents reacted to with mild irritation about me moving too far away despite having never once visited my Portland apartment in the 3 years I lived there. Henderson & Pike was known for innovative urban development projects and sustainable design, exactly the direction I wanted to take my career. The firm's partners had noticed my work on several award-winning smaller projects and recruited me specifically. The salary was nearly double what I'd been making, but the real value was in the opportunity to work alongside some of the best architects in the Pacific Northwest. My schedule became even more demanding than before. I typically arrived at the office by 6:30 in the morning and rarely left before 8 at night. Weekends were for catching up on sleep and occasionally seeing Rachel, who had also relocated to Seattle for a counseling position. My dedication didn't go unnoticed at the firm. Within 18 months, I was promoted to project manager and given increasing responsibility for high-profile clients. Meanwhile, Derek's life was following a very different trajectory. After bouncing between 3 different entry-level business positions, he had settled into a sales job at an office supply company. The position was stable, but offered limited growth. Around the same time I moved to Seattle, Derek married Allison, his girlfriend of 2 years. Allison came from a wealthy family but had expensive tastes that her part-time job as a yoga instructor couldn't support. Their wedding was elaborate. My parents emptied a significant portion of their retirement savings to pay for it, something they mentioned frequently in the years that followed. Within a year of marriage, Allison became pregnant with twins, a boy and girl they named Liam and Emma. While I was gradually building financial stability, paying down student loans, building savings, investing carefully, Derek and Allison were living well beyond their means. They bought a 4-bedroom house in an upscale Portland suburb with a minimal down payment and a mortgage that consumed nearly half their monthly income. Allison drove a luxury SUV that was leased rather than purchased. Their social media accounts showcased expensive restaurants, designer baby clothes, and lavish holiday decorations. The financial strain became apparent shortly after the twins were born. Subtle hints began dropping into family conversations. Derek's company was restructuring. Allison needed to focus on the babies rather than work. Property taxes had increased. Medical bills were unexpected. Each comment was carefully constructed to imply hardship without directly asking for help. My parents responded by babysitting several days a week, grocery shopping for the young family, and I strongly suspected providing direct financial support. When family discussions turned to money, my mother would give me pointed looks, clearly expecting me to offer assistance. After several uncomfortable conversations, I began sending Derek $500 each month, money I had been saving for my own down payment on a home. "You're so lucky you don't have the expenses Derek does," my mother said during one phone call. "No children to worry about, no family to support." The implication that my brother's family was somehow my responsibility to support went unexamined. For 2 years I maintained this arrangement, watching my savings grow more slowly, while resentment built steadily. Each time, Derek posted photos of a new purchase or vacation, While my monthly checks sat uncashed in their account, I felt more like an ATM than a brother. The turning point came after I led a major sustainable urban housing project that won a prestigious industry award. The recognition came with significant professional exposure and a substantial year-end bonus that nearly doubled my annual income. For the first time, I had enough saved for a serious down payment on a home of my own. Real estate in Seattle was expensive, but with my architecture background, I was open to properties that needed renovation. After years of designing spaces for others, I was excited to finally create something for myself. I began browsing listings, imagining a space that would reflect my aesthetic and provide a sanctuary after long workdays. I kept my house hunting mostly private, mentioning it only to Rachel and Marcus. Rachel and I had been dating for 3 years by then, and while we hadn't officially discussed moving in together, we spent most nights at one another's apartments. We had begun talking about marriage as a future possibility, and I knew any home I purchased would eventually become ours. "You deserve this," Brian Rachel said one evening as we looked through listings on my laptop. "After everything you've worked for, you should have a space that's truly yours." The thought of finally having a home, not just an apartment, but a real home I owned, filled me with a quiet joy I hadn't experienced before. It represented not just financial achievement, but something deeper: stability, permanence, a physical manifestation of the life I had built for myself, despite the lack of support from those who should have cheered me on the loudest. Little did I know that sharing this news with my family would trigger a chain of events that would finally force me to confront decades of inequality and entitlement. Thanksgiving seemed like the natural time to share my house hunting news with the family. Rachel and I drove from Seattle to my parents' home in Portland, arriving Thursday morning with a homemade apple pie and a bottle of wine. Derek, Allison, and the twins, now 2.5 years old, were already there, the children racing through the house, while Allison directed my mother on proper placement of the table settings. The initial greetings followed their usual pattern: enthusiastic hugs for Derek's family, polite nods for Rachel and me. The twins received elaborate gifts from my parents, handcrafted wooden toys my father had apparently spent weeks making in his workshop. I couldn't recall him ever making anything for me, not even a simple birdhouse when I was a child, fascinated by architecture. Throughout the early part of the day, conversation centered entirely around Derek's job challenges, Allison's efforts with the children, and the twins' latest developmental milestones. My mother interrupted Rachel 3 times when she attempted to share news about her recent promotion at the counseling center. I had learned long ago not to even try until directly asked, which rarely happened. It wasn't until we were seated at the dining table, plates loaded with turkey and sides, that my father finally turned to me with his obligatory, "So what's new in your world, Brian?" I had rehearsed this moment, planning to present it casually, without the excitement I actually felt. "I've started looking at houses in Seattle. The market's competitive, but I've found a few promising options." The reaction was immediate and startling. My mother, who had been absently nodding through Rachel's abbreviated description of her work just moments before, suddenly snapped to attention. My father put down his fork. Even Derek, who typically maintained a studied disinterest in my life, looked up sharply. "A house. You're buying a house." My mother's tone conveyed surprise that bordered on disbelief, as though I'd announced plans to build a spaceship. "That's the plan," I replied, taking a sip of water to hide my discomfort at suddenly being the center of attention. "I've saved enough for a decent down payment, and with mortgage rates where they are, it makes sense." "Well," my father boomed, as if I'd just announced I'd won the lottery. "That's something, isn't it? Our Brian, a homeowner." What followed was a 30-minute interrogation about neighborhoods, price ranges, square footage, and amenities. Subjects my family had never shown the slightest interest in before, despite my career in architecture and design. "You should look in Northgate," my mother said decisively, referring to a Seattle neighborhood I knew was at least 40 minutes closer to Portland than where I'd been searching. "Janet from my book club has a daughter there. Says it's up and coming." "Lots of families in Northgate," my father added meaningfully. "Good schools." I exchanged a quick glance with Rachel, who raised an eyebrow slightly. Neither of us had mentioned children or schools in our brief description of what we were looking for. I've been focusing on areas closer to downtown, actually, I explained. Shorter commute to the office. Downtown Allison interjected with a slight wrinkle of her nose. But it's so cramped and noisy. You need a proper house with a yard, especially if you're spending that kind of money. How many bedrooms are you looking at? Derek asked his first direct question to me in what must have been months. 2, maybe 3, if the price is right, I answered. I'd like a home office where I can work on freelance projects. The table went silent for a beat too long. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Derek cleared his throat. Only 3 bedrooms. That seems short-sighted, my father finally said. You need at least 4. 4. I repeated confused. Why would I need 4 bedrooms? Well, you need your bedroom, obviously. My mother began counting on her fingers. And a guest room for when we visit. And if that guest room is for us, you'll need another for when Derek's family stays over. And then a room for the twins. Of course. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I realized with growing disbelief that she was completely serious. Mom, I live in Seattle. You've never once visited me in the 6 years I've lived there. Because you've always had those tiny apartments, she replied as if this explained everything. Where would we all sleep? But a house is different. The twins would love to spend summers with Uncle Brian in Seattle. Allison chimed in, though the twins had barely registered my existence during the handful of times I'd seen them. They're so creative. Emma's already showing artistic talent just like you. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said slowly. I'm not buying a vacation home for the family. I'm buying my own house for me to live in. No one's saying it's a vacation home, my father replied, his tone, suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. But family should always have room for family. When your mother and I bought our house, we made sure it had space for Grandma Ruth when she needed care in her later years. That's different. She lived with you full time, I pointed out. And we had room for Derek when he needed to move back home after college. My mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. For 3 years, I added, unable to keep the edge from my voice. The point is, Derek interjected, a house is an investment in family. If you're finally in a position to buy something substantial, it should benefit everyone. I looked around the table, taking in the expectant faces of my parents and brother, the calculating gaze of my sister-in-law, the uncomfortable expression on Rachel's face. It dawned on me with crystal clarity. They weren't excited about my achievement. They were excited about how it could serve them. Have you thought about the Highland Park area, my father suggested? It's only about 15 minutes from Derek and Allison. If you found something there, you could even help them out with their mortgage. Split the cost of a bigger place, maybe. The audacity of the suggestion left me momentarily speechless. Rachel's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently in silent support. The Millers down the street did something similar, my mother added. Their son bought the house next door when it went up for sale. Now the grandchildren can just run back and forth between houses. Isn't that clever? I don't think Brian wants to live next door to us, Mom, Derek said, with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. But 15 or 20 minutes away would be perfect. The twins would still see their uncle regularly. We could do Sunday dinners, Allison suggested, warming to the idea. Trade off hosting duties. And you wouldn't need to drive all the way to Portland for holidays anymore, my mother added. We could all be together more often. The conversation continued in this vein through the remainder of dinner, with my family planning my life around their convenience, as if my preferences were entirely irrelevant. They discussed which bedroom would be theirs when they visited, how the twins would need a play area in the backyard, how convenient it would be to have a family member close by, when Derek occasionally traveled for work, so Allison wouldn't be alone with the children. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted in a home, what neighborhoods appealed to me, what features mattered for my lifestyle. Whether Rachel and I had our own plans for the future, I was simply the checkbook, the provider, the solution to problems I hadn't created and had no obligation to solve. Later that night, as Rachel and I prepared for bed in the small guest room, formerly Derek's childhood bedroom, still adorned with his high school sports trophies, the full weight of the dinner conversation settled over me. They really expect me to plan my home purchase around their needs, I said, still struggling to process it. As if that's the most natural thing in the world. It's not just entitled, Rachel replied, her training as a counselor evident in her measured tone. It's a fundamental lack of recognition that you exist as a separate person with your own legitimate desires. In my professional opinion, that's some toxic family dynamics right there. Do you think they even hear themselves? I wondered aloud. Do they actually believe this is reasonable? They've spent a lifetime treating Derek as the priority and you as the support system, Rachel said gently. Why would they approach this any differently? As we lay in the darkness of Derek's old room surrounded by monuments to his childhood glory, while my own achievements remained unacknowledged, I made a decision. This house, my house, would be the line in the sand. For once I would put myself first regardless of the fallout. The drive back to Seattle the day after Thanksgiving was quiet, both Rachel and I processing the implications of my family's expectations. As we crossed the state line into Washington, I turned to her. I'm not telling them anything else about the house hunt, I said firmly. Not a single detail until after I've closed on something. I think that's wise, Rachel agreed. They've shown they can't respect your boundaries or choices. On Monday morning, I called Jessica Morgan, a realtor, who had been recommended by a colleague at the architecture firm. We arranged to meet for coffee that afternoon to discuss my search parameters. Jessica was professional and direct qualities. I appreciated immediately. I explained my situation, both what I was looking for in a home and the family complications I was hoping to avoid. So basically, you need a realtor who can keep a secret, she summarized with a knowing smile. Trust me, I've seen family dynamics complicate house purchases before. Your search will be completely confidential. Instead of focusing on the neighborhoods my family had suggested, we looked at areas that made sense for my life, close to my office, near the cultural amenities Rachel and I enjoyed in established neighborhoods with character rather than the cookie-cutter suburbs my parents had envisioned. Over the next 3 weeks, Jessica showed me 14 properties. Some were immediately dismissed due to location or condition. Others had potential, but didn't quite feel right. I was beginning to worry that my budget constraints and specific desires were too limiting when Jessica called with excitement in her voice. I've got a pocket listing you need to see today, she explained. It's not officially on the market yet, but the sellers are motivated. It's a 1920 Craftsman in Queen Anne with original details and enough issues to scare off the typical buyer, but nothing that would intimidate someone with your background. Queen Anne was a historic neighborhood on a hill overlooking downtown Seattle, nowhere near the areas my family had suggested, and about 45 minutes from any direct route to Portland. It was known for stunning views, walkable streets, and homes, with architectural character. In other words, perfect. We toured the house that afternoon. The moment I stepped onto the deep front porch with its tapered columns and native stone accents, I felt a connection to the property. Inside the home needed significant updates. The kitchen was from the 1980s. The electrical system required a complete overhaul, and the bathrooms were functional, but dated. But the bones were exceptional oak floors beneath worn carpet, built-in bookshelves, flanking a river rock fireplace, leaded glass windows that cast prismatic patterns across the walls when the sun hit them just right. The sellers inherited it from their Aunt Jessica, explained as we walked through. They live in Arizona and just want a quick sale. The asking price reflected the work needed, falling just within the upper range of my budget. By the time we finished the tour, I knew this was it, the home I'd been looking for. I made an offer that evening, contingent on inspection, but otherwise clean and competitive. 2 days later, it was accepted. The following weeks were a blur of inspections, paperwork, and negotiations. The inspection revealed no major structural issues, but confirmed my assessment of the systems needing updates. I was able to negotiate a slight price reduction based on the electrical panel requiring immediate replacement. Throughout this process, my family continued to send listings for homes near Derek and Allison, each more presumptuous than the last. My mother texted almost daily with questions about my search, which I answered vaguely or ignored entirely. Derek sent floor plans of houses with notes about which bedrooms would work best for the twins. Allison created a shared Pinterest board titled Brian's New House, filled with children's bedroom decor and guest suite ideas. I maintained radio silence about my actual progress, deflecting questions with comments about the competitive market and needing more time to find the right place. Meanwhile, I secured financing, signed countless documents, and moved steadily toward closing on the Queen Anne Craftsman. The day I received the keys was surreal. Rachel came with me to the final walkthrough and signing. When the seller's agent handed over the heavy old skeleton key that opened the front door alongside the modern keys for the updated locks, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We spent that first evening in the empty house sitting on the floor of what would become the living room, sharing takeout Chinese food and a bottle of champagne as sunset painted the leaded glass windows in amber and gold. "To your first home," Rachel toasted her eyes, reflecting the warm light. "To our first home," I corrected softly. "If you want it to be." Her smile was all the answer I needed. Over the next few weeks, I developed detailed renovation plans, drawing on my professional expertise to transform the house while honoring its original character. The first floor would remain largely intact, with the kitchen expanded into a small mudroom to create a more functional space. Upstairs, the original 4 small bedrooms would be reconfigured into a primary suite with walk-in closet and bathroom, a comfortable guest room, and a spacious home office with views of the Seattle skyline. Notably absent from my plans, the dedicated family wing my parents had envisioned, the twins' playroom Allison had pinned dozens of ideas for, and the Derek and Allison suite my brother had texted about repeatedly. I hired contractors I knew professionally, scheduled the work in phases to manage costs, and began the transformation. Each decision I made was based solely on what would create the perfect space for Rachel and me, and possibly our future together. Each choice felt like a quiet act of rebellion against a lifetime of putting others' needs before my own. As walls came down and new spaces took shape, I felt myself changing too, standing straighter, speaking more confidently, shedding the role of family support beam I'd been assigned without consent. The confrontation with my family was inevitable, but for the first time in my life, I was ready for it. 3 months after closing on the house, I was still fielding regular questions and suggestions from my family about my supposedly ongoing house hunt. The renovations were progressing well. The electrical system had been completely updated. The kitchen was nearly finished, and the upstairs reconfiguration was taking shape. Rachel had unofficially moved in her books, mingling with mine on the built-in shelves, her coffee mug sitting beside mine each morning. My mother called one evening as I was reviewing tile samples for the master bathroom. "Your father and I have been talking," she began without preamble. "We think you're being too picky about this house situation. Derek found a beautiful listing just down the street from them. 4 bedrooms, newly updated kitchen, finished basement that would be perfect for when the twins get older and need their own space. It's at the top of what you said your budget was. But for a forever home that will serve the whole family, it's worth stretching a bit." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I appreciate the thought, but I've actually already bought a house." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. What she finally managed. "I bought a house. In Seattle. The deal closed 3 months ago." 3 months. And you're just telling us now?" Her voice rose sharply. "Why would you keep something like that a secret from your family?" Based on everyone's reaction at Thanksgiving, it seemed like my house purchase had turned into a family decision rather than a personal one. I needed to make this choice for myself. "Well, where is it? Is it near Derek? How many bedrooms? When can we come see it?" I answered truthfully, but braced for the reaction I knew would follow. "It's in Queen Anne, which is nowhere near where Derek lives. It's a Craftsman I'm renovating. It has 3 bedrooms, but I've reconfigured it to have a master suite, a guest room, and a home office." "Only 1 guest room?" Her tone sharpened. "That won't work at all. Where will Derek and Allison stay? Where will the twins sleep?" "In a hotel, I imagine, if they ever visit. Or they could stay in the guest room for a night or 2. The twins are small enough to use air mattresses." "Air mattresses. For my grandchildren." She sounded personally offended. "This is unacceptable, Brian. You know the whole point was to have a place where the family could gather." "No, Mom. The point was for me to buy my own home that works for my life. I never agreed to purchase a family compound." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with my mother declaring she needed to discuss this situation with my father and hanging up abruptly. Less than an hour later, my phone began ringing with calls from my father, then Derek, then Allison, all of which I let go to voicemail, needing time to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The messages they left confirmed my worst expectations. My father expressed deep disappointment in my secretive behavior and failure to consider family needs. Derek accused me of being selfish and deliberately choosing a location inconvenient for family visits. Allison's message was passive-aggressive masterpiece about how some people just don't understand the importance of family and how the twins will be so disappointed. After listening to all three messages, I texted my mother, "I understand everyone has strong feelings about my house purchase. I'm happy to discuss this further when everyone has had time to process their initial reactions. How about Sunday dinner at your place?" Sunday dinner had always been my parents' domain, the time when family issues were hashed out, announcements made, and decisions reached. By suggesting it, I was playing by their rules while giving myself time to prepare. Rachel offered to come with me for moral support, but I decided this was a conversation I needed to have alone. "This has been brewing for 34 years, I told her. It's time I faced it head on. When I arrived at my parents' house that Sunday, the tension was palpable. My mother's tight smile as she greeted me at the door, my father's overly firm handshake, Derek and Allison's matching cold stares from the living room, all signals that I was walking into an ambush. We made it through about 15 minutes of strained small talk before my father cleared his throat meaningfully as we sat down to eat. "So, Brian, your mother tells me you've made a significant purchase without consulting the family." His framing was so revealing. Not congratulations on buying your first home, but an accusation of failing to consult them as if I needed permission. "I bought a house, yes. It's a beautiful Craftsman in Queen Anne, with original woodwork and leaded glass. I'm renovating it to update the systems while preserving its historic character." Queen Anne, Derek interjected. "That's nowhere near us. It would take 45 minutes minimum to get there from our place, and that's without traffic." "It's close to my office," I replied. "My commute is 7 minutes." "You could have found something with a reasonable commute that also considered the family's needs," my father said. "Instead, you deliberately chose a location that makes regular family gatherings difficult." "And only one guest room," my mother added, after we specifically discussed needing space for everyone. "You discussed that," I corrected gently. I never agreed to it. "The twins need their own space when they visit," Allison said, as though this was an established fact rather than her preference. "They're at an age where they need routine and stability." "Which they have at their own home," I pointed out. "Visits to Seattle would be occasional, not regular occurrences, requiring permanent, dedicated space." "So you're just cutting us out of your life?" Derek demanded, his voice rising, "making it impossible for us to be a part of your world." "I'm creating a home that works for my daily life," I explained, working to keep my tone even. "You're welcome to visit, but this is my home, not a family vacation property." "After everything we've done for you," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes, "this is how you repay us, by moving far away and buying a house that's too small for family." The statement was so divorced from reality that I nearly laughed. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom? You didn't help with college. You didn't support my career. You've never once visited me in Seattle in 6 years. The $500 I've been sending Derek monthly for the past 2 years adds up to more financial support than you've ever given me." The table went silent. Derek had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. He'd obviously never mentioned my financial assistance to our parents. "That's different," my father finally said. "Derek has children to support. Children he chose to have, despite not being financially prepared," I replied. "Just like he chose a house he couldn't really afford, and a lifestyle beyond his means." "You can't possibly understand the expenses involved in raising children," Allison interjected. "You're right, I can't. Because I've been responsible with my life choices. I worked my way through college. I lived within my means. I saved carefully. And now I've purchased a home that suits my life and my budget. I fail to see why that decision should revolve around your needs rather than mine." "Because we're family," my mother exclaimed, as if this explained everything. "Family supports each other," I agreed. "But support should go both ways. When have any of you supported my goals or celebrated my achievements without immediately turning the conversation back to Derek?" "That's not fair," Derek protested. "Isn't it? When I graduated with honors from one of the top architecture programs in the country, You got a European vacation. When I won a major industry award last year, Mom changed the subject to your promotion to assistant sales manager. When I called to share that I was house hunting, the entire conversation became about how my purchase could benefit you. I turned to my parents. I've spent my entire life watching you give Derek everything while I work twice as hard for half the recognition. I'm not resentful of Derek for that it wasn't his fault. But I am done organizing my life around this family's expectation that my achievements should somehow benefit everyone but me. So you're just being spiteful, my father concluded, missing the point entirely. Buying a house we can't comfortably visit to punish us for perceived slights. No, Dad. I'm making a healthy decision for myself after a lifetime of unhealthy family dynamics. I bought a house I love in a neighborhood that works for my life. You're welcome to visit and stay in the guest room. If the whole family wants to come at once, there are excellent hotels nearby. But my home is my sanctuary, not an extension of this family's pattern of treating me as an afterthought until I have something you want. I can't believe how selfish you've become, my mother said, dabbing at her eyes. This isn't how we raised you. You're right, I replied, standing up from the table. It's not. It's how I've raised myself to finally recognize my own worth and stop accepting scraps of attention in exchange for constant sacrifice. I love you all, but I won't apologize for making choices that prioritize my well-being for once. I left before they could respond, the weight of 34 years of unmet expectations and unacknowledged sacrifices finally lifting from my shoulders as I walked to my car. The conversation had gone exactly as I'd anticipated, yet I felt oddly peaceful. For the first time I had spoken my truth without hedging or apologizing, and regardless of how they received it, that alone was victory enough. The 2 weeks following the confrontation at my parents' house were eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, no emails, a complete communication blackout that, while expected, still felt strange after a lifetime of family connection, however flawed. I channeled my energy into the house renovations, working alongside contractors during the day, and tackling smaller projects myself in the evenings. Rachel provided unwavering support, helping me process the complex emotions that surfaced as I painted walls and installed fixtures. It's natural to feel both relieved and sad, she assured me one night as we sat on drop cloths in the half-finished living room. You're grieving the family relationship you deserved, but never had. On day 16 of the silence, my phone lit up with my mother's name. I braced myself before answering. Brian, she began, her voice carrying the martyred tone. I knew, all too well. I hope you've had time to think about how hurtful your actions have been. Your father and I are very disappointed in your behavior. No hello. No asking how I was. Just straight to guilt and disappointment. I understand you're upset, Mom, I replied calmly. But I stand by my decision and everything I said. What followed was a 15-minute monologue about family obligation, her sacrifices as a mother, and how I'd changed since moving to Seattle, none of which acknowledged a single point I'd made during our previous conversation. I listened without interrupting, a skill I'd perfected over decades of family dinners. We're willing to move past this if you'll reconsider your position, she concluded magnanimously. Perhaps you could look into adding an extension to this house you've bought. Your father mentioned that might be a compromise. Mom, I'm not adding an extension. The house is perfect for my needs as it is. Well, that's just selfish, Brian. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. It's not difficult to want my own home to reflect my own needs. What's difficult is having those boundaries questioned and dismissed. The conversation ended with her sighing heavily and saying she'd give me more time to think about things. 3 days later, my father called with a nearly identical script, though his approach leaned more toward logical arguments about family investment and practical considerations, rather than emotional manipulation. Derek's approach was more direct. You're being a complete jerk about this whole house thing, he said when I answered his call. Mom's been crying, Dad's upset, and Allison is taking it personally that you don't want the kids to have a special place in your home. Derek, I bought a house for me to live in. It has one guest room which anyone in the family is welcome to use for short visits. That's a perfectly normal boundary. But we're not just anyone. We're family. He insisted, as if this magic word nullified all need for personal space or boundaries. Yes, And as family, I would hope you'd respect my choices and be happy that I've found a home I love, rather than making it about what you think you're entitled to. The twins were really looking forward to having their own room at Uncle Brian's house. He continued, ignoring my point entirely. They've been asking when they can see it. Given that the twins rarely acknowledged my existence and had never expressed interest in spending time with me before, this seemed unlikely. They're welcome to visit with you and Allison anytime. We can set up air mattresses in the guest room or the office. Air mattresses? He scoffed. Like they're random college buddies crashing for a weekend. They're 4 years old, Derek. They'd probably think air mattresses were an adventure. His next question confirmed what I'd long suspected about my family's real interest in my home purchase. How big is your yard? Does it back up to a park or anything? Allison was thinking the kids could spend part of the summer with you to give her a break. And there it was, the expectation that my home would become a convenient childcare solution for my brother and sister-in-law. The yard is a typical city lot, big enough for a small garden and maybe a bistro table, but not a playground. And no, I won't be hosting the twins for extended stays. I work 60 to 70 hours a week. I'm not in a position to provide childcare. Derek's response was predictably indignant, ending with him declaring, I'd changed, and not for the better, before hanging up. Allison's contact came in the form of a group text to the entire family, with a link to a 4-bedroom house in Highland Park that had just been listed. This would be perfect for Brian, she wrote. Right size, right neighborhood. Great schools nearby, for when he has his own kids or when the twins visit their uncle. I replied simply, I already own a home I love. Please respect that. This cycle continued for several weeks, periodic attempts by various family members to persuade, guilt, or manipulate me into either selling my house and buying something that better suited their vision, or renovating my existing home to accommodate their desires. Each time I calmly restated my boundary, refused to engage in circular arguments, and ended the conversation when it became unproductive. Eventually, my mother called with a different approach. We'd like to see this house of yours, she said, her tone suggesting she was making a tremendous concession. Your father and I thought we could drive up this weekend. Derek and Allison want to come too with the twins. While I had expected this request, eventually the timing caught me off guard. The renovations were well underway but far from complete. The kitchen was functional, but still missing backsplash tile and some cabinet doors. The master bathroom was down to the studs. Dust covers protected furniture in several rooms where painting was in progress. Nevertheless, I recognized this as potentially the first step toward a new family dynamic. You're welcome to visit, I said, but I want to set clear expectations. The house is under renovation, so it's not in showcase condition. And it's a day visit, only the guest room furniture hasn't been delivered yet. My mother's pause communicated her displeasure at this limitation, but she agreed to a Saturday afternoon visit. I spent the week preparing not just the house, but myself, emotionally, for what would inevitably be a challenging encounter. When they arrived, the tension was immediate. My mother's tight smile as she surveyed the front porch. My father's overly critical assessment of the craftsman details. Derek and Allison's exchanged glances as they noted the modest size of the living room. Only the twins seemed genuinely excited, racing from room to room with the boundless energy of 4-year-olds. It's cozy, my mother finally said in a tone that made it clear cozy was not a compliment. The character is nice, my father allowed, but it seems like a lot of work for a space this small. I gave them a tour, explaining the renovation plans for each room and the original features I was preserving. When we reached the upstairs, my mother peeked into the guest room, modestly sized with a queen bed and small dresser, and frowned. This is it, the only guest space, she asked. Yes. It's perfect for 1 or 2 people visiting for a few days. Allison stepped into the room that was being converted into my home office. This would make a much better room for the twins. It gets better light than that small guest room. It's not a room for the twins, I replied evenly. It's my office, where I'll work on freelance projects. But when we visit, she began. If you visit, I corrected gently, you're welcome to use the guest room. The twins can use air mattresses if it's a short stay. For longer visits, there are several nice hotels within walking distance. Hotels, my mother repeated as if I'd suggested they sleep in the street. For family. Yes, for comfortable accommodations when multiple family members visit at once. This is my home designed for my daily life. It has the capacity to comfortably host 2 guests at a time. Anything beyond that requires alternative arrangements. The remainder of the visit continued in this vein, my family pointing out all the ways the house failed to meet their expectations, me calmly maintaining that their expectations weren't the point. When they left after barely 2 hours, the goodbye was stiff and uncomfortable. Rachel arrived shortly after they departed, having tactfully given me space for this initial family visit. "How bad was it?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me. "Exactly as expected," I replied. "They hate it because it's not what they wanted. They're especially upset about there being only 1 guest room." "And how are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully. Relieved, actually. It's all out in the open now. They've seen the house, they understand I'm not changing my plans, and they can either accept it or not. The ball's in their court. Over the following weeks, contact from my family became less frequent, but also less confrontational. My mother still made occasional comments about the limited space in my house, but no longer actively suggested I sell it. My father asked about the progress of renovations with what seemed like genuine, if reserved interest. Derek and Allison maintained a cooler relationship, still clearly disappointed that their childcare plans had been thwarted. As the renovations neared completion, Rachel and I spent a quiet evening in the almost finished living room, the craftsman windows casting long shadows across the newly refinished hardwood floors. "Move in with me," I said suddenly. "Officially. Not just staying over most nights, but living here, together." Her smile lit up her entire face. "I thought you'd never ask." "Yes." I retrieved a small box from my desk drawer, a vintage ring I'd found at an antique store in Queen Anne, its Art Deco setting, reminiscent of the craftsman details throughout our home. Kneeling on the floor we'd sanded together, I asked Rachel to marry me in the home we were making our own. Her tearful yes was the final piece that made the house truly complete. That night, lying in bed, listening to the quiet creaks and settling sounds of our historic home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. For the first time, I had created a space that was entirely mine, ours, without compromise or concession to family expectations. The pain of setting boundaries had been real, but so was the peace that followed. In choosing myself, I had also chosen a healthier future, not just for me, but potentially for all my relationships moving forward. 6 months after my family's uncomfortable first visit to the house, the renovations were complete. The craftsman details had been lovingly restored, the systems modernized, and each room reflected both the home's historic character and our personal aesthetic. Rachel had fully moved in her counseling books, filling the built-in shelves, her garden herbs thriving in the kitchen window. Our wedding plans were underway, a small ceremony in the backyard garden we'd created together with close friends, and yes, family in attendance. The invitations had been sent, including to my parents, Derek, Allison, and the twins. Their RSVPs had arrived promptly, with notes expressing varying degrees of enthusiasm. The subtle shift in family dynamics had begun gradually. My mother's birthday call included her first genuine question about one of my projects in recent memory. My father sent an article about craftsman restoration with a brief note, "Thought this might interest you. Small gestures but significant departures from previous patterns." Derek and Allison remained more distant, still nursing the disappointment of thwarted plans. But even there, I noticed a slight softening. Derek had called to ask my professional opinion about a renovation they were considering for their own home, a small acknowledgement of my expertise that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. The most significant test of our new boundaries came during the winter holidays. After careful consideration, Rachel and I decided to host Christmas at our home. The invitation was specific: December 25th arrival at 11, dinner at 3, with the clear understanding that everyone would return to their hotel by 9. "They'll never agree to that," Rachel worried as we sent the invitation, especially the hotel part. To our surprise, they did not, without some negotiation and clarification, but with eventual acceptance that this was the new normal. My mother called to ask if she could bring her traditional Christmas pudding. My father inquired whether he could help with any projects around the house during their visit. Small olive branches, from both sides. When Christmas Day arrived, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and hope. The house looked beautiful, decorated with tasteful greenery and vintage ornaments that complemented its craftsman aesthetic. The dining room table was extended to its full-length set, with the china Rachel had inherited from her grandmother. My parents arrived first, bearing gifts and the promised pudding. My mother's hug was slightly less stiff than it had been in recent months. My father actually commented positively on the completed renovations, noting the quality of the woodwork restoration with genuine appreciation. Derek, Allison, and the twins arrived 20 minutes later. The children immediately asked to see the special fort I had created, a small tent with pillows and books in the corner of the office, a concession to family visits that didn't compromise the room's primary purpose. It was my own idea, a small gesture of goodwill that established both welcome and boundaries. Dinner was not without tension, but it lacked the hostile undercurrent of previous gatherings. Conversation remained mostly cordial, focusing on neutral topics rather than perceived slights or unfulfilled expectations. When my mother made a passing comment about the cozy dining room, I chose to take it at face value rather than as criticism. As the evening drew to a close, my father surprised me by raising his glass. To Brian and Rachel, he said somewhat stiffly, but sincerely, "And their beautiful home. May it bring you as many years of happiness as our home has brought us." It wasn't a grand declaration of understanding or an apology for past favoritism, but it was acknowledgement of my home, my choices, my relationship. A small step toward healthier family dynamics. After they left on time, as requested, Rachel and I curled up on the sofa beside the fireplace, processing the day. "That went better than I expected," she admitted. "Your mom actually asked me about my work, and she remembered details from our last conversation." "I think they're finally starting to see me," I reflected. Not as an extension of their expectations or a support for Derek, but as my own person with valid choices and boundaries. The journey toward this new equilibrium hadn't been easy or linear. There had been setbacks along the way, passive-aggressive comments, subtle attempts to push boundaries, occasional reversion to old patterns. But, with each consistent reinforcement of my limits, each calm refusal to be manipulated by guilt or obligation, the foundation of our relationship had slowly begun to transform. I'd learned valuable lessons through this process. Lessons that had changed not just my family relationships, but my understanding of myself. True family supports your growth rather than exploiting it. For years, I'd mistaken obligation for love, sacrifice for connection. I'd allowed my family's expectations to define my worth and limit my choices. Breaking free of that pattern hadn't destroyed our relationship. It had created the possibility of building a healthier one. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for authentic relationships. By clearly defining what I was and wasn't willing to accept, I'd given my family the opportunity to relate to the real me, not the compliant version I'd presented for most of my life. The hardest conversations are often the most necessary. Avoiding conflict had allowed unhealthy patterns to persist for decades. Only by directly addressing the inequality and entitlement could any real change begin. Your success belongs to you first. While sharing good fortune with loved ones can be meaningful, it should come from genuine choice rather than obligation or expectation. My home was a symbol of my hard work, my sacrifices, my vision, and choosing how to share it was my right. As our wedding day approached, I reflected on how far we'd come. The Craftsman house on Queen Anne Hill had become more than just a property. It was the physical manifestation of my journey toward self-respect and healthy boundaries. Each restored detail, each carefully designed space, represented a choice made for my happiness rather than others' expectations. Our future plans were taking shape too. Rachel and I had discussed children of our own someday, knowing that we would raise them with clear boundaries and equal support. We talked about potentially helping Derek and Allison's twins with college expenses when the time came, not from obligation, but from genuine care and the desire to be positive influences in their lives. Most importantly, we were building our relationship on mutual respect and support, creating a home where both of us could flourish. The quiet purchase my family had known nothing about had become the cornerstone of a new life built on authenticity rather than obligation. In the favorite spot in our home, a window seat overlooking the Seattle skyline, surrounded by the craftsman details that had first captured my heart, I found myself at peace with the choices that had brought me here. Sometimes, the quietest decisions speak the loudest about our worth. In choosing myself, I had opened the door to more genuine connections with everyone in my life, including the family I'd always longed to truly be seen by. If you've ever had to set difficult boundaries with family who felt entitled to your success, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments. Did standing your ground change your relationships for better or worse? Remember to like and subscribe for more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics and finding your own path. Thank you for listening, and remember, your success is yours, to share on your terms, not anyone else's to claim.